All right. This is JP Rindfleisch, and this is Office Hours, and we've got Mary and John. John, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know where you are in your author journey?
Yes, hello. My name is John Kraus. I live in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, in the Madison, Wisconsin area, and I have self-published a middle grade series. The character's name is Pudge Amazon. There are three books in the series, and I have been on the this Dialogue Doctor podcast a couple of times before,
Excellent.
speaking about my
Yeah,
characters. And I'm also starting work on a new series for middle grade readers, a new detective series with some new cast of characters. So happy to be on.
excellent. Uh, and Mary, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I was thinking of Wisconsin. Years ago, I went to Wisconsin Dells, and I remember it was beautiful.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so, Mary Van Everbrook. I live in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and right now I'm writing short stories that all
Yeah,
have happy
excellent.
endings.
Excellent. Awesome.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh, John, that you're from Sun Prairie because I'm from Rockford, Illinois. So we're close to each other.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions that both of you sent me. Who'd like to start? Feel free to just jump in and we can kind of roll.
Well, the last time we met, I kind of hogged the conversation. So Mary, I'm going to let you go first.
All right.
No, you didn't hog anything. Uh, well, um, I've read your book a couple times now, and
Thanks.
the way my brain works, it's a great book. Okay.
Thank you.
But I think I'm doing it backwards. And what I mean by that is I sent you my I've written I haven't written a lot of full
Hmm.
length novels, but have two that I've written rough drafts. They're lit fic thriller backgrounds. And when I did the two times I did the dash with you guys, um, I found my brain doesn't work in terms of fitting. I'm not good at fitting my characters into prescribed traits or
Hmm.
uh, personality traits, things like that. So I read your book this last time, the last go around. I went, aha, I think I have figured out what to do with this. Before I create a story, I'm going to do it differently now. I'm actually going to create it using the nine, whatever you
Beats.
want. Yeah, the nine traits, the nine motivating factors, and decide. I'm going to play around with it and see which ones I want to choose as the initial want, developing,
Hmm.
and the true need, and see what I come up with. I think it's going to be interesting because right now what I do is I create the story and then I try and fit it into one of your schematics, and
Hmm.
I don't I don't do well that way. Some of it
Yeah.
fits, and then others don't.
Hmm.
And the last part of your book I really found intriguing. I'm going to really study it more. I'm going to be on your next podcast, I think, and I have a question about that. But I think I think I've been using it differently than you intended, right? Because your intention, I would assume, would be to create a story using the different themes within the hypothesis, right? You know what I mean?
Well, yep, I do know what you mean. And actually, I think that it's a tool that you can use on either side of the
Okay.
process. And so the whole intent is if it works for you, use it. That's the big intent. I used it as a developing tool when I worked on Mandrake Manor, and that became the guiding light for the story. But I
Mm-hmm.
created that first. When I was doing edits for the Leah Ackerman series, I was looking at what was the feeling we wanted the reader to have, but that wasn't the topic that I had when we were in the drafting and in the outlining phase. That was as I was editing, I was looking at the chapters and questioning like what was the feel that we wanted readers to have. And then I was looking at chapters where they were in the story and how they would hit based off of if I were to use a story hypothesis
Okay.
and hit on those needs. Um, and
I
I'm
want to use them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I'm learning because for those that don't know, story hypothesis uses the 9 fundamental needs as opposed to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, simply because by using 9 fundamental needs that have a free reign to pick and choose the 9, we can show a myriad of growth and character arcs without worrying about like, are they hitting their survival needs first before jumping up? So it was meant to just use it for a way to create differing stories. But the 9 fundamental needs existed from an economist looking at Chilean society and questioning like, how do I know if we have a successful society outside of money? Because of course everyone's going to be like, well, money will make happiness, but that's not always true. There are needs that people need, and those are on varying levels. And that's sort of where the 9 needs come from. And now as a storyteller, using those 9 needs to have a character growth arc is really fun to play with. And I'm even looking at recently how to look at broken forms of those needs when characters are looking at protection, but in the sense of like they are protecting someone that may be a quote unquote morally bad or bad person from others because of this fear of how the story might unfold if they don't protect them. So sort of like questioning all of like, how can I look at needs in different lights based off of how stories are told to sort of expand on it. But I hope that helps in the sense that like it's meant to be a tool, and however it works in your process, that's where I want it to sit.
Mhm. No, I really like the themes and I want to use it. I'm just trying to figure out the way I think how to use it
Yeah.
creatively. And I think I'm getting there. I think I'm thinking more about using it to actually create the story instead of
Hmm.
creating the story and then fitting it into, yeah.
Yeah, I actually I was working on a story that I'm going to try to do a short story for a group of friends, and they gave me a topic, and I was coming up with ideas, and I got a rough idea for like a sci-fi like first contact story, and as I was creating the story, I I created sort of the summary and I was like, man, this would really hit well. And then I took a pause and I said, what would those needs be? And I actually wrote down what those needs were because that told me and it would inform where the direction of the story would go. So I was almost doing it in tandem where I was writing out a synopsis without thinking about like protection need and affection need. And then after I wrote that synopsis, I was then looking at it through the lens of which needs that would hit. So if you use it in that sense, I think it would work pretty well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Mhm.
Yeah. I also see we have Mark who showed up. Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Would you mind introducing yourself and letting us know where you are on your writer journey?
Sure. I'm retired now, so I can devote more time to it. And so I've worked on one thing for it took 10 years on and off because it had 3 arcs to the story and 3 characters, obviously a protagonist.
Yeah.
And it was a horrendous effort to get the timelines, how to write the point of views and the timelines, and have eventually everyone sync up and then have a denouement that made sense.
Yeah.
So I think I'm about 1 million words, which I say now you're finally getting where you should be. I've written 3.5 novels. This one I finished I'm about halfway through the follow up to it, and I think like a lot of writers, I think everything is like, wow, this is really great, and then I'll put it away for 2 months or so, and then look at it again and go, I can do so much better. I'm missing emotion. I'm
Oh
missing
yeah. Yeah.
flavor of the scene, or I'm jumping too quickly, or I'm using too many words to express this, and what can I just hack out of this? Um, and then I had a formatting issue that really scared me. I didn't realize it, but it suddenly jumped from about 285 pages to 410. And I'm like, what happened? Well, it started creating space after every paragraph and doing all those.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be amazed when it does that. And like even with titles of chapters, it would add 4 lines in between. That's 8 more lines. And so I
Yep.
was like, I don't know. Someone's going to think this is some War and Peace novel that no one will pick up, a huge tome. So once I got
Yeah.
past that scare, I have worked with Fictionary in the past and found it
Mm-hmm.
useful, but I also am more unconventional. I'm a pantser.
Yeah.
And I find that works really well for me. And I've had 4 or 5 people, beta readers, who are not my friends, and I've asked them to be very critical, and they've given me a few suggestions which have worked out well. And I just had somebody from Story Editor just work it up, and obviously I didn't see all the point of view errors or tenses that I got wrong, but what she said was it really was a very interesting concept. She really
Mm-hmm.
thought it had commercial value, but I needed to work on all these things so that they coalesce. So
Yeah.
my biggest problem, I think, now is because I have these different timelines and the different characters, I don't want too much time to go by for the reader after reading one character. It's like on TV, you can jump on an action scene from
Yep.
Hawaii Five-0, one side of the island to the other, back to the mainland. It's harder when you're writing, and if you go too long, because you can with one character, when you jump back to the other one, now like I think it joggles the reader's mind, but also too much time has gone by, and you're going. It's almost like you're going backwards now to fill in the details. So that's my concern. Now I'll have some long chapters, the 2,200, 2,500 words, and I'll have some that are 3 or 4 paragraphs to fill in, so that these other 2 characters that are the lesser but important aren't left behind. And so,
Right.
I don't know if that's the correct thing to do or not.
Okay. Well, um, yeah, I think that in terms of sort of like a story progression, that makes me think of stories like, Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time series. And
Uh-huh.
I mean, what was it? The third and fourth Game of Thrones series basically was split in the middle, where half of the cast was shown in book three and half of the cast was shown in book four. Uh, People like the books, right?
Well,
So
that was great, but they already had an audience. You
right,
can break
right.
you can break a lot of rules once you have an audience.
Yeah, yeah. But what I'm saying there too is like there I wouldn't worry too much about like, am I leaving this character too far behind? If you're telling it in terms
Right.
of beats and you're hitting that emotional flow through the story. And I think that
Yes.
multiple POV stories are really difficult to write, period. I wrote Mandrake Manor where I intentionally made it that every chapter was a new character. It did not matter. And it was the story had to continue in a linear-ish fashion. And so
Right.
if characters were together, then they were together in this scene, but it was from this POV. And then we would split off and we would have our events separately. And I did have some like jump back where our main character would walk into the house, they would say something, something, and then they would go do their task. And then the next chapter, it would be from a different POV of watching that character come in and they're responding to that. And then they go and do their task and sort of like a
Right.
time anchor. Um, all of that is difficult. It gets more and more difficult when you add in multiple POVs, especially for one of those initial novels. And
Well,
the other difficulty that I see that too is the looking back on a piece of work and wanting to correct it. uh, Eventually it becomes that piece where it's like I have to put this out in the world and
oh yeah, I
accept
agree.
that it is where it is. Yeah. So
That's the typical story of engineers that never want to give up their baby, and you have to have it out
yeah,
on the street and
yeah,
see if the car drives.
yeah. So do you have from your last edit, do you sort of have like a list that you can put into an actionable task as to like what was needed?
Yes, I did, and I decided that I'm only going to do those things because
Hmm.
the other ones are minor. Where it's like really nitpicky stuff, and that's what I
Yeah.
want to get the product out there. Um,
Yeah.
it could it be a little better? Sure, but at what expense? And also, I can move on to other projects if I'm not spending an immense, on the 13th rewrite sort of concept.
Yeah. 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 So I would definitely hit whatever your last editor, if you agree with them, like make that an actionable list, hit those. Um,
Yeah, that's my goal.
yeah, yeah. Was there anything you kind of wanted to talk about here and tease out?
Well, it was yeah. So the story is linear. It's not quite a prologue, but the first chapter introduces you to at least two of the three characters, and
Mhm.
it looks seems like a thriller or mystery, but it crosses a number of genres: a young adult, speculative fiction, we'll call it. Basically, the theme is about the orbits of heaven, earth, and alien life collide for the first time, and that's when the Messiah arrives. But it's not so religious in the sense, but that the idea that um, there's nothing in any of the written books about who the Messiah was as a teenager.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the concept in the book starts out: he will be this Messiah when he turns 18 if he survives next week.
Right.
And there's all these things that are happening that could be the doom and gloom of mankind and
Yeah.
him. And so it starts from that, and they're on the run from the government, he and his friends, because they have solved the problem later on in the book. But it's giving you a hint like things don't fit. His
Yeah.
girlfriend's maimed terribly in a car accident, yet in the beginning she's prancing in a very pretty dress off to go shopping. So the reader's like, I want to see more. And this is the feedback I
Yeah.
get. Um, but then it's going from that point, from his birth linear forward till he's 17, a year
Hmm.
before he's going to be the Messiah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that sounds very focused on like at least from the main character's point of view, this who am I sort of question, am
Yeah,
I this Messiah?
he doesn't want the role. It's kind of like the ancient prophets that
Yeah.
you know Jonah and the whale. He didn't want to be a prophet. He didn't want that job. He rejected, and there's a lot of things going on there
Yeah.
that fit into that, and each character sees it from a different point of view. One thinks it's a godly thing, another one thinks it's alien, and the third one is a dog that becomes super intelligent, and it doesn't have a context for any of this stuff, and so you get its perspective as things go along.
Yeah. Yeah. And so from what you've explained there, at least like
Yes,
if I were to use my hypothesis hit on
right.
this, I would really see this trajectory of understanding, and it's not only understanding from this main character, but from the others around them, and
Yes,
using that so that when you go to look at these chapters and you question like, do I need this 3 paragraphs about this character and this event,
right.
or can I move it later and does the time bit matter?
I've already done
Um,
that. Yeah,
yeah, and
I
it's sort of like building in this understanding that every time that characters do understand something, they receive something that gets closer to this person accepting their identity. And every time that they refuse to understand something, it's almost like the end of time sort of thing, or the, getting closer and closer to that risk of loss of identity and loss of self.
that's exactly what I've done. Is I know some people like to go in long, flowery explanations, and they had
Yeah,
whiskers
yeah,
coming out of their ears, and I kind of trying to put dribs and drabs, and like as you say, each time the character introduced, there might be something like he's brushing his long hair behind his ears, so now he has long blonde hair, that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stuff. Instead of a Melville character that goes on for 5 paragraphs, and then the actual event happens. I know there's different forms of thought, literary writing versus. Um, I want people to feel like they have to read on to get more of the juicy parts and understand why they're in this predicament.
yeah, yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
cool.
I think John
Yeah,
hasn't had
yeah.
a chance to talk.
Yeah, yeah. We'll hop to John. What's your question if you want to tackle that?
Sure. Well, my question is about how to write ethnically, racially, gender diverse characters without being overt about it.
Yeah.
That's like kind of the piece to it. So kind of where
Yeah.
this comes from is I recently read a middle grade novel where these are 13-year-old kids, and one of the kids is a new kid at his middle school, and he meets an eclectic cast of characters at lunch, and they're all going around the table introducing themselves, and they're saying, "Well, I'm so and so, and this is my race, and this is my gender, and this is my religion." And I'm like, "Well, people don't really talk like that."
No.
And
Yeah.
for those watching the video here, I mean, you can see I'm a middle-aged white male,
Yeah.
but I certainly want to and do include a diverse cast of characters in my books and anything I write going forward. I still want to do that, but I want to be able to do it in a way that's certainly respectful, of course,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also not just coming out as an info dump of,
Yeah.
in walks so and so, and they're this color and they're this shade of skin tone, and they're this religion. And I want to be able to have my characters shine through their personality, their skills, their intellect, how they drive the plot, how they interact with all the other characters. And yes, I want to be able to have identification markers of where they come from and their background and their beliefs. Absolutely. But how do I do that without just telling the reader? How can I do that by
Right.
showing? And the
Right.
way that I've done it, it's certainly minimally, but the way I've done it in my books so far is through people's names, right? I mean, if they have a name that you can identify with a certain race or nationality, um, that's about as far as I've gotten. I mean, I think other good ways to do it would be dialogue or just maybe certain mannerisms. It could also be, well, they attend a certain place on Sundays or Saturdays, or they have this kind of food for their dinner. I mean, that's a way to show that. Um, so those are just things that I'm thinking, but I'd like to get ideas about how to do that
Yeah.
in a good way that's respectful, but not just because I just don't think that's really the way to do it. Is in walk so and so, and then give them
Oh,
this
yeah. Yeah.
thing about, well, here's their skin color and here's their religion. It's like, no, I'd rather show that. Um, so
Yeah.
that's my question.
Yeah. Well, I'll preface this with I am a queer person, but I am definitely a white person. But I do think that these conversations are good to have, and that definitely ones that I think that we'll continue to learn and grow from, and that yeah. So prefacing all of that, I think one of the big things is to read authors that are not from like that are a minority, and see how they write. And also one of the most difficult things, and for myself too, I struggle with this, and I'm trying to do better, is the default is always going to be white. You don't have to tell someone that a character is white. Everyone just assumes that they're white, and we're almost
Hmm.
stuck in this situation where we have to constantly other categorize people. We have to categorize that they are not cisgender, that they are queer, that they are black. We have to categorize them because we have to move away from this sort of what we put as a pillar for what our character is. And I think that one of the things that I want to do is remove that pillar and have to explain everyone, and then that way we're sort of creating this sort of common field. If someone is pale or white, I should also note that if I am noting that there is a black character, and I want to include black characters and Mexican characters. How I did this in like Mandrake Manor, because one of the characters that I have in the main cast is like Mexican American, is he has like curly black hair, and he looks in the mirror and he talks about how his gorgeous Mexican mother gave him this hair. That's the line. That's all I had to do. And then everyone's like, "Oh, okay. He probably is a little bit darker, and maybe at some point I mentioned olive skin. I don't know. I didn't have to, because at that point I pretty much noted that. Um, I know that in like the Leah Ackerman series, we really wanted to include a lot of diversity, because we just because of the fact that like my co-writer is a Jewish immigrant from Venezuela, and like I'm a queer person from the Midwest, and so we were like, we want queer characters wherever we can, and we want to include just anybody, because we in America there is a myriad of people, and so we wanted to, if someone wears a hijab, we wanted to mention that. If
Yep.
someone
Yep.
like we have one of our characters is black in the main cast, but we didn't want her to be the only black person, because then it becomes tokenized. So mentioning that other characters are also black, or other, and just sort of filling in the cast around them with multitudes of people. um I think that that's one of the big things, is one, reading black and brown people's books and seeing how they do it. And two would be trying your best to, if you are going to include these sorts of other people that don't look like you, to then have to reference what people look like that are you as well. And so, if you're going to mention that someone is black, then you mention that someone is pasty or white or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, because that does give fairness to it, because I agree that when you had said that the default is white, it's like, yeah, I can't remember reading a novel where a character is introduced as a white heterosexual Protestant, right? It's just
Yeah, yeah,
that's kind of the default. So,
yeah. Mark, I saw you had your hand up.
yep,
Yeah, so John, I struggle with the same thing. Sure, I can name the person Amari and have his sister is named Shaniqua, and that kind of gives a hint. But I
sure.
got bitten by my friends and said that's a real slam. That's not really what you want
Yeah,
to do. And so I try to get creative. And so, like what JP said was, okay, if they're Muslim and it's a woman, you can talk about the brightly colored keffiyeh flapping in the breeze around her cheeks.
mm-hmm.
And if it's a black person, he's looking in either the mirror, like you said, and using a pick on his hair, or he's describing his family at a dinner table. It's not him; he's describing them, and so you get the idea what his world is.
Hmm.
And so I agree with JP. Those tools are so much better, and they're so much more subtle because it's really fraught with danger to speak in a certain way. Everyone's going to attack you for being,
Oh yeah, yeah,
assuming, and you'd be amazed the ire of any group there is. They're going to find something wrong with anything you write anyway. But you don't want to get, burned on the internet on your reviews because of something simple like that. So anyway, those are just simple things, like you said, the foods they might eat or the places they may visit. They could be walking down the street and say, that's my shul over there, or my buddy's
Yeah,
shul,
yeah.
and then you know that okay, they're Jewish. So
Right.
yeah,
it's they're simple drops rather than that, and then you might add some things later on that add to it, and then it's like okay, now the person's certain. I think too many of the writers just like go for 4 or 5 sentences with descriptions, and they think that they've done the right job, and to me, I think that's a very weak way of doing it.
Right. I
yeah,
think that's, I guess, I'm thinking too that I think that's really important writing in first person as well, because I'll just speak for myself, but I'm going to
Yeah.
make this presumption that this is really for everybody. Like think for myself, and I'm brushing my hair in the mirror. I'm not thinking about, oh, my Norwegian heritage, right?
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And how that's influenced the color of my hair, right? I'm not thinking about because that's just something that's just so obvious, and
Right,
so
but you
it's just
might
not
pick
even
up a you
something I
might grab a
noticed. Was
pick. You might grab a pick to tease out your fro or whatever.
exactly.
yeah,
Um,
Exactly, but
and
they're not necessarily going to notice their black hair because
exactly.
they see it every day, and it's not something that needs to be noticed by them in a first person context, right?
And
yeah,
if you really want to know, like a black person, read Toni Morrison, like Sula, and it's pretty thick, and you don't have to lay it on like that, but she really slathered it with even the slang of, Southern Louisiana in there as well. But I think JP was spot on with his recommendation.
Yeah, and I would also too like watch shows from the people you want to emulate that are also written by and produced by the people you want to emulate. Unfortunately, you have to do that additional step because sometimes the people behind the camera aren't always representative of who they're trying to show on the camera. But the more that you're able to do that, the more that you can see little nuances. And I'm going to use Mandrake Manor again just because like queer representation was really important for me in that. And one of the love interests is of this large burly man, but it isn't until there's a moment where we see the scars on his chest that we recognize, oh, he's a trans man. And it's really like this intention that I had to, no one would know that until they didn't have a shirt on. And until that moment, it wasn't addressed. It was this big burly man. And that's people who are trans, the concept of passing is such a frustrating thing. And I think that I really wanted to represent that, like, people don't know. There are plenty of people in this world that you just don't know who they are and what they are, or who they were born as, until the moment that something sort of signifies that. And so I really wanted to represent it in that sense. And I think that it's obviously easy when there are physical features that are clearly identifiable, but I think that when we're able to reserve those and maybe make it a moment, like going down to the synagogue because I've got Ramadan or something along those lines, whatever it is, maybe someone doesn't know that they're Jewish until that moment where they're like, I can't go to this event because I've got this. And they're like, what's that? And then you get that moment, that conversation moment, because your character may not know.
Yeah,
And then you get that
that's a
moment to
good
build
point.
up on it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
On
As we're
J-
talking, I'm remembering. I did listen to Jeff Elkins on a podcast. I don't, and he was talking about this very topic. So it might have been Joanna Penn's the Creative Pen podcast. I'm not sure, but I guess maybe JP, if you could maybe just an ask, if you could ask Jeff what podcast that was, and maybe put a link to that in the notes
Yeah.
so that others listening to this may be able to listen to that. So I just remember that was a really good. I'll have to go back and listen to that one too.
I,
So if I can find
along
it.
your 9 emotional cues, whatever, I wrote a character, and they were going to be trans, or go through gender affirming surgery. And so I had them being all stressed around there at a sleepover at a friend's house. And finally, he admitted that he forgot his his puberty suppressing
Yeah.
medication to bring with him. And he couldn't get back home to take it. And so it was really bothering him. But you didn't know. You just felt this stress in the patient. And the character was snappy at everybody at the sleepover until that came out. And then it was like, okay, that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And those things are so good to have as a queer person just reading it and knowing that like people are sort of aware that those things exist, and that like of course that person would be frustrated from that because that is something that is really important to them. And like I don't have that experience, but there are plenty of times where I'm almost like looking at the way that I talk and how I talk. And I used to work in manufacturing, and it would always be my partner with an ambiguous pronoun until people learned that I was in a relationship with another guy. And then it was he, and I would start to open up a little bit more. But that was just something that I kept away from them. And so people in a situation where, you know, you're meeting a new friend, they're not going to be like, hi, I'm JP, I use they them pronouns and I am queer. Like they're not going to do that to a random stranger because there is a risk depending on who that person looks like. And so those things that we can conceal, there are almost these layers of like, how much can I trust you with who I am? And so those things can be revealed over time, and it's not like a walk into the door and I'm going to tell you everything about my life sort of thing. And so I think that what that does is that adds context of trust into these characters as you build relationships with them, and that way you don't have to front load all of this information. It
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
information that can come over time.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And ways to not front load it, get to know the
Yeah.
characters.
I think
And
I think especially when you're talking about like the tertiary or the secondary characters and the tertiary characters, the levels of trust and sort of create like, if this character trusts this character fully, this is their full identity. And then start to pick away. What happens when they're in a situation where if they're a Jewish person and they're in the United States, maybe they conceal a lot of, you know, who they are depending on the certain topics that are happening, or depending on where they are just in general. Maybe they start to conceal those pieces. And so now it's, you know, we can look off physical details because we can't conceal that as much. And we have that layer of trust that we can then unfold later.
this is all very
Oh,
helpful. I don't have any
John, I
yeah.
wanted to mention,
questions.
if you go on Jeff's website and you click on podcasts, he has all his podcasts listed by topic, and I'm sure it's in there. I remember that one.
Yeah.
I think it was on gender. It was on gender, or there was a panel of
Oh,
two,
I was
three
on that
people.
one.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that was it.
It was a long
So
one.
you might find it there quickly.
Okay. Okay. So that's a
Yeah.
Dialogue Doctor podcast specifically.
No, Dr.
If,
Or
Dialogue website. Do you have his
yeah,
website?
well, no, yeah, I
Yeah, and then
do.
you
That's
yeah, it
click
is.
on podcasts and they're all listed.
right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that if that's the one you're talking about where we were talking about gender identity and
No,
all of
this
that.
was where Jeff was a guest. Sorry, he was a guest on somebody
Okay.
else's
Yeah.
Oh,
podcast.
okay,
So
that's
I think
something
it's
else then.
yeah, I think it was the Creative Pen with Joanna Penn. So I'm looking
Oh,
up
that's
that right
something
Probably.
else
now,
then.
and
And
he
Okay,
was
she
on that
lists them out
podcast.
too.
So
So
yeah.
I'll search around for it.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions or topics or things we want to talk about?
Well,
Um,
go ahead, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, like, some of them structurally, these stories, they want to have like point one, and then something going on, and then finally the finality. Are any of the commercial products successful that don't follow that plan?
Um, I mean, so that concept one is really broad, but
I
it's
mean,
this
the
sort
Orson
of
Scott
like,
Card kind of thing. You have to do this, this, and this, and otherwise
yeah,
it's because I read stuff it does not seem to follow that, and they've been very popular.
yeah. I mean, whenever you're able to break away from the mold and get people to look at it,
Yes,
then it might draw people's attention. However, I would say that a lot of Western media has this sort of three-act structure, three-act flow to it. And
right.
so that doesn't mean that that's the only way. That doesn't mean that,
Okay.
but um, it becomes difficult when you change what you are doing to have that sort of palatability to an audience that you need to grow. I'm not going to discourage you from doing it. By all means, please do. But
Okay.
like for example, like I write cozy fantasy serials and I'm leaning more and more into like Japanese storytelling. It's something called Kisho Tenketsu, which is
Right.
basically you're just adding in a little twist in the middle of it that came out of left field. Like it's not a twist that we're used to in Western storytelling. And I'm finding joy in that, and I'm finding that readers are finding joy in that. But it's a cozy like fantasy, and so there was more leeway in that sort of storytelling because that really stems off of that slice of life concept and more of that Eastern storytelling. So I think that where I'm getting at is if you're writing something that is more aligned along the lines of like thriller or a lot of like things that we as Westerners really enjoy, there is a sort of structure that people expect, but yet if you can get it in front of them and you show a break of that structure and it's something that they enjoy, then it would be raved upon just as much. So it's one of those, which were you gonna do?
Well, it's like I look at it like music. There's stuff that'll be played on the radio because they follow this
Exactly.
exact structure, and there's so much other stuff you'll listen to that's really good that doesn't get there, and they have
Yep.
alt channels and all this other stuff for that, and you say like that's really sad that the commercial market in general, but if you go on Spotify or something else, there's 1,000 different subgenres, and a lot of people like that, and
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're supposed to write in general for the largest possible audience. I rather have a more dedicated, smaller audience that goes,
Then I
"Wow,
would do
this is
that. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, so
I agree.
uh, okay. If you wanted to add in, please do. But what I'll quick add is like, um, write the story that you want to write and
oh,
just
that's
know that it may be one of those more ambiguous things. And I would argue that those songs that you were talking about where it may not be as popular on the radio, but yet people are finding it and listening it, those
right,
become really true fans to that artist. Whereas the
exactly."
big pop songs that, will get a big flow of people, that song may be forgotten in a month or two as the new one propagates. So it is two very big directions that a writer could go in the sense of writing something that is very to market, very hits all the tropes and hits all the lines. Maybe it streaks up there, becomes a top seller in that year, but then maybe it vanishes because another one comes in its place. Whereas if you are someone who wants to write that sort of different story that has a very different vibe to it, and you start to get a following that will follow you for your next story and your next one, that's a different path.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Mary, did you have something?
I was going to ask you about competing needs. I don't know, you might want to talk about that in your next one. I forget what the topic was, but I find it challenging to, especially the developing, to choose one, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, so it's, I guess you just have to prioritize the main thrust. I guess that's where your plot comes in too,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just the characters and the modulating their voices.
It's sort of, I know exactly what you mean because it's difficult because those 9 fundamental needs are fundamental needs that humans have. And I'm almost arguing honing in and focusing on like what are your 3 of the 9. And I would love to be like, what's your 1? But I knew that was too much to ask for. So I was like, what's your 3? Really, really helps focus on the trajectory of the story. Of course, you're going to pull on these other needs because ideally your character is fully fleshed out. Ideally, they will have moments where they may need a moment of rest. So, or they may need to create something. But what is the one driving force that drives them towards the end? And I think too that that may help you later on when you look at genre because when you're trying to fit later afterwards, when you're trying to fit what's my genre for this, if affection is your developing need, it's probably a romance. Or if it's your true and final need, it's probably a romance. If understanding or identity are of the needs, it's probably either new adult or young adult because those are really popular in that genre. Of course, it can be plenty of other ones, but those sort of help figure out like where it probably sits on the shelf as an idea.
Mhm.
Well,
Really
maybe.
allows for
Oh,
a lot
go
of
ahead.
creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What was that, John?
Oh, I was just gonna say if since this is the dialogue doctor and I love writing dialogue, my
Yeah.
books are dialogue heavy, and I've spent a lot of time really honing that so that it's sharp and helps move the plot along. But I guess JP, I'll put you on the spot here. Do you have a an advanced dialogue craft tip that you can give us? Like something that maybe you've learned once upon a time that was just like really hit home to you that like can set your work above the average.
Uh, for me, it's all about acting, right? I mean, that's what I do is I don't physically always like sit differently when I'm in a different character's head, but I do see myself as I'm writing dialogue. I will like sit over here for one character and almost sit over here for another character. And I may like position myself differently because I'm almost like I'm trying to take on their personality as I write. And I can really feel that coming through, especially for certain characters that have that stronger personality. It becomes this sort of acting thing. So I guess my big thing is view it as if you are an actor and you are uh taking on these different roles. Especially if you're stuck on stage alone and you have to figure out how to create different personas without anything else on stage, because if you're able to represent how that character may sit or talk or express themselves and you go to write it down, you may see that you're using different words or you may see that you're using them differently, especially if you are pausing to take a breath in the middle of a sentence, or if you are taking your sweet time because you're enjoying that silence before you speak, or if you are vomiting it out and then sitting back and waiting for the next character to reply. All three of those look different written on the page, right? Because you're doing an action and then you are speaking. You're speaking, pausing, speaking, or you are speaking and then you're waiting. And that way you're doing dialogue differently for those characters based off of how they interact.
Okay. No, I really like that. That's great. I'm thinking about this. It's like, okay, let's say I have two characters. One is very prim and proper. I'm going to want to dress up in my best button down and put on a tie
Yeah.
and sit up straight and
Yeah.
back
Yeah. I'm already
straight
feeling it too, right?
and type out that person's dialogue that way. And then the other character is sloppy and slouchy. So then I've got to just sit back and put my sweatpants on and slouch in my chair and write dialogue in that sitting in that position. Actually, that sounds pretty interesting. Maybe I'll have to give that a try.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I mean,
I,
and I've noticed, oh, go ahead, Mark.
no, that's fine. I was just going to say, I don't know if it works for anyone else, but I find that if I write dialogue that's not quite right, I'm driving down the road and the character starts talking to me and saying, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't say that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, they're right. And it just comes out of the sky into my head. And like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about that, but you're right. I have to go back home or take some notes and then change that. And it always feels better afterwards. Is that a common
Yeah.
thing or?
I would think so. I mean, if you're recognizing that the what you've just written and you're mentally processing it, and then you're realizing that's not correct, or that character wouldn't speak that way. That's the same concept. And you feel that there was almost like the you as the writer was in the way of the personality of the character that you wanted to write. And so then you're just processing that and you're editing through. And I, I mean, what I was going to say is like, if you've had a day job where you've had, coworkers and a manager, and the way that you talk to them is even differently. You as who you are talk to them very differently, and how you may respond to a professional email or how you may respond to it passively aggressively, like all of those are different, per my
Yeah.
last email, blah 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 blah. Like you're picking the words that you're so if you think about the way that how you would respond in those situations, that can help you start to sit in those different personalities.
Yeah, I mean, an example of that in my books, Pajamas on my main character. I mean, there is some uh how he speaks does change depending on who he's talking to. When he's talking to,
Yeah.
say, the principal of the school, he respects authority, and so he's going to speak differently than when he is just shooting the breeze with his buddies,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Like
try to
Eddie
And
Haskell
that's
respect
all.
that.
talking to
Yeah.
Eddie Haskell talking to Mrs. Cleaver versus the Beaver. You may not understand that reference, JP, but
No, I do
the
not.
rest
He
of
is
us.
too young for that.
I have
Yeah.
no idea what you're talking.
He's the young one here.
There was a show called Leave It to Beaver, and
Oh yeah, I've heard
one
of
of
that. Yeah.
the older brother's
He's heard of
friend would like, oh hell, just lather the sweetness on the mother, and as soon as he saw his little brother, he's like, come here, you little punk, I'm going to poke your eyes out. You know,
Yeah.
talking different to
Yeah.
different people.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And that's all character modulation, right? It's basically these layers again that you have based off of the formality in which the person is that you are talking to. If it is someone that is an authoritative figure, you're going to put a bunch of layers up and protect the words that you're saying because you know
Yeah.
that you'll get in trouble if you use the wrong ones. And you'll almost be completely revealed among peers or people that you trust that you can say whatever you want to say in front of. So yeah, that's also the other difference too. So it's not only the personalities and sitting differently, but it's like how much of that can I also talk about depending on who and where I'm with.
Well, and that goes back a little bit earlier, just to the whole uh, gender, race, ethnicity, is how much, as an author, but even as a character within the book, I mean, how much do we give away when we're first meeting somebody? It's like, yeah, I think we need to reflect that, how that is in the real world, reflect that in our books, and just give that
Yeah.
information slowly.
Yeah. Well,
Because
cool.
it's the characters learning to trust each other, but it's also the reader learning to trust the author, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. Any other things you want to talk about? No? All
Good.
right. We'll end it here.
Thank you.